Hi, and welcome back to Friend Saga. Today, a grandfather discovers something that changes everything he thought he knew about the man his daughter married. This is what happened when I paid a surprise visit on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Here we go. The lock on the attic door was new. I noticed it the moment I stepped into the hallway, the way you notice a piece of furniture moved 3 inches from where it always sat. It was a heavy-duty padlock, the kind you'd put on a storage unit or a shipping container, bolted through a metal hasp that had been screwed directly into the door frame. Fresh screws. The wood around them pale and raw, not yet stained to match the old trim. I had been in that house 100 times. My daughter had bought it 2 years ago with her new husband. I had helped carry boxes on move-in day, fixed a leaking faucet under the kitchen sink, spent every Thanksgiving in the dining room just 10 feet from where I was standing. That padlock had never been there before. My grandson appeared at the end of the hallway. 6 years old, still in his school clothes, his backpack half hanging off one shoulder. When he saw me looking up at the attic door, something happened to his face. Something I had never seen there before. Not surprise, not curiosity. Fear. He crossed the hallway in quick, small steps and took my hand. "Don't go up there, Grandpa," he said quietly. "That's where things disappear." I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school principal in Akron, Ohio. I have seen teenagers in crisis, parents in denial, situations that required calm and careful thinking when every instinct said to react. But standing in that hallway with my grandson's hand in mine and that brand new lock staring down at me from above, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt afraid. I want to tell you how I got to that moment, because none of it started there. It started with my daughter's divorce 5 years ago, and the man she married 18 months later, and the slow, quiet way things had been wrong ever since in ways I couldn't name until I could. My daughter is my only child. Her mother, my wife of 34 years, passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2019. It was fast. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We didn't have enough time, and we both knew it, and there was nothing either of us could do about that. After she died, my daughter and I became closer than we'd ever been. The way loss sometimes pulls people together into the space another person left behind. Her first marriage ended in 2020. No dramatic reason, just 2 people who had grown into different shapes over 12 years. Her ex-husband moved to Portland. He's a decent man. He calls on my grandson's birthday. He was never the problem. She met her new husband at a work conference in Columbus. He was a project manager for a construction firm, 44 years old, divorced once before, no children from that marriage, or so he said. He was handsome in a careful, deliberate way, the kind of man who always had the right thing to say a half second after you expected him to say it, like he was reading from a script slightly too well rehearsed. I didn't dislike him, that's important to say. He was polite to me, attentive to my daughter, good with my grandson on the surface. He coached my grandson's Saturday soccer team for 1 season. He grilled steaks on the 4th of July and laughed at the right moments and never once raised his voice in front of me. But my daughter started canceling plans. Not dramatically, not all at once. Small things. She'd say she was tired, or that my son-in-law had made reservations somewhere, or that my grandson had a thing. I'd call and she'd answer distracted, would say she had to go, would text an apology an hour later. When I visited, she was always just slightly elsewhere, present in body but attention aimed somewhere just over my shoulder, toward whatever room her husband was in. I told myself it was a new marriage. Newlyweds recalibrate. 2 people building a life together need space to do it. I told myself I was projecting my grief, filling the silence my wife left with worry that didn't belong there. I told myself a lot of things. My grandson started changing in September. Subtle things at first. He'd always been loud, a non-stop talker, the kind of kid who narrated everything he did in real time. By October, he'd gotten quieter. He stopped initiating the games he used to drag me into every time I came over. He flinched once when his stepfather walked into the kitchen and set a glass down on the counter too hard. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I should have said something. The Tuesday in November started because I was in the neighborhood. I had a follow-up appointment at a doctor's office 4 blocks from my daughter's house. And I hadn't seen my grandson in 3 weeks, and I thought I'd stop in, surprise them, maybe stay for dinner. I didn't call ahead. I didn't think I needed to. My son-in-law's truck was not in the driveway when I pulled up. My daughter's car was, though she often worked from home on Tuesdays. I knocked. No answer. I tried the door and it was unlocked, which was normal. She left it unlocked for my grandson when he walked home from the bus stop. I stepped inside and called out. Silence. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the back porch. Empty. I was about to call my daughter's cell phone when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. Small. Repetitive. Like something being rubbed against a surface over and over. I found my grandson in the corner of his bedroom closet, behind his hanging clothes, his knees pulled to his chest, rocking. He was still in his school shoes. His lunchbox was on the floor beside him, unopened. He'd been home from the bus for at least an hour and hadn't eaten, hadn't changed, hadn't moved from that closet corner. I pushed the clothes aside and crouched down in front of him. He looked up at me and his chin started trembling. "Grandpa," he said. "Hey, buddy." I kept my voice even. 31 years of practice. What's going on? He shook his head. Look down. You can tell me anything, I said. You know that. Another long silence. Then, very quietly, I was bad this morning. What happened? I forgot my math homework on the table. He said forgetting means you don't care. He said I had to think about what I did. I waited. My heart had already started doing something steady and slow and awful in my chest. He put me up there, my grandson said, before school. He turned the light off. I was up there in the dark for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't react the way every part of me wanted to. I sat down on the closet floor across from my grandson, and I breathed. In the attic? He nodded. Has he done that before? My grandson looked at me for a long moment like he was calculating something, like he was deciding whether the answer was safe. 6 years old, doing that calculation. I will never forget that look. Sometimes, he said. When I'm bad, does your mom know? He shook his head quickly. Too quickly. He said not to tell her. He said it would make her sad and it would be my fault. I picked my grandson up off the closet floor and carried him downstairs and sat him at the kitchen table with a glass of apple juice and the lunch he hadn't eaten. I told him I was going to make a phone call. I told him everything was going to be okay. I told him that clearly and directly and with the most conviction I could manufacture, because I did not yet know if it was true. I called my daughter first. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Then I called 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, I was also thinking about the padlock, about what my grandson had said at the bottom of the stairs when he first saw me looking at it. That's where things disappear. I told the dispatcher my location, told her what my grandson had described, told her I believed a child had been subjected to ongoing confinement and psychological abuse. She told me an officer was on the way. She told me to stay on the line. I told her I would call her back. I went to the garage and found a bolt cutter in the tool chest along the back wall. My son-in-law was a contractor. He had every tool imaginable organized in neat labeled drawers. I found what I needed in under a minute, which told me the garage had been organized by someone who needed to know exactly where things were, always, at all times. That kind of control doesn't stay in the garage. The bolt cutter went through the padlock in one clean motion. The attic stairs folded down with a groan. Cold air came down first, the particular stale cold of a space that doesn't circulate, doesn't breathe. I climbed. The attic was mostly what attics are. Boxes, old furniture, holiday decorations, the accumulated weight of a life. A string of bare bulbs ran along the center beam. I pulled the first one. On the left side, pushed against the slanted wall, was a bare wooden chair with a rope coiled on the seat, not tied to anything, just coiled there, waiting. Beside it, a heavy-duty flashlight, batteries out, sitting on top of a plastic storage bin. I stood there looking at that chair for a long time. Then I looked at the plastic bin. It was a large one, the kind people use for seasonal storage, gray with a yellow lid, snapped shut on all four sides. It wasn't unusual. There were a dozen like it in the attic. Except this one had a combination padlock snapped through the lid handle. I had the bolt cutter in my hand. I want to be honest about the moment before I used it. I knew what the police dispatcher had said. I knew that technically I should have waited, should have let the officers handle it, should have preserved whatever was inside as evidence. I knew all of that. But I also thought about my grandson in that closet, rocking in the dark, his lunch uneaten. I thought about how long he had been carrying this alone. I thought about the word sometimes, and what it cost a 6-year-old boy to say it to me. I cut the lock. Inside the bin, layered under 2 folded moving blankets, was a child's life. Not a child living at the remnants of one. A pair of boys' sneakers, size 4, worn at the toes. A red spiral notebook, the kind schools hand out, filled with careful child's handwriting. A school photo in a plastic sleeve, a boy, maybe 7 years old, blonde hair, gap-toothed smile, wearing a green t-shirt with a dinosaur on it. On the back of the photo, in adult handwriting, Danny. 2nd grade, 2009. Beneath that, a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a missing persons flyer, printed on regular copy paper, the ink slightly faded. A child named Daniel, 8 years old, missing since October 2010, last seen in Millbrook, Indiana. The photo on the flyer matched the school photo in my hands. Same boy. Same gap-toothed smile. My son-in-law had grown up in Millbrook, Indiana. My daughter had mentioned it once, in passing, when they were first dating. He doesn't like talking about his childhood, she'd told me. Small town, complicated family. He's moved past it. Daniel had been reported missing 14 years ago. I sat on the attic floor and held that flyer and listened to the sound of a siren getting closer. The officer who came was young, mid-30s, the kind of calm professionalism that means someone has seen enough that not much surprises them anymore. I walked him through it step by step. The closet, the chair, the bin, the flyer. He called for backup before I finished talking. My daughter arrived home 20 minutes later to 3 police vehicles in her driveway. I will not try to describe what her face looked like when I told her. I don't think language does it justice. She sat on the front porch steps and held her own arms and did not speak for a long time. Then she asked where her son was. I told her he was inside with an officer, having hot chocolate from the kitchen. She nodded and kept nodding longer than she needed to. The attic, she said finally. Yes. He told me it was storage. He told me the padlock was because he kept valuable tools up there. Power tools, he said. He didn't want them to be a temptation for a 6-year-old. When did he put the lock on? August, she said. Right after school started. August. 3 months of this. Did you ever hear anything? At night? In the morning? She closed her eyes. Once, in September, I thought I heard something from above the bedroom. He told me it was an animal, probably a raccoon in the eaves. He said he'd take care of it. She opened her eyes. He said he'd take care of it. My son-in-law was picked up at a job site in Summit County at 4:17 p.m. He did not resist. He said almost nothing. He asked for a lawyer before they finished reading him his rights, which told the detectives everything they needed to know about how prepared he'd been for the possibility of this moment. The lead detective came to my daughter's house that evening to talk to me. She was a woman in her late 40s, the kind of tired that comes from years of seeing what people do to each other in private. She sat across the kitchen table from me and told me what she'd been able to piece together in the first few hours. My son-in-law had been married once before, in Millbrook, Indiana. He and his first wife had a son named Daniel. The marriage ended in 2009. A custody dispute followed. In October 2010, Daniel disappeared from his father's apartment during a scheduled visitation weekend. My son-in-law reported him missing. Said the boy must have wandered out in the night. Said he'd looked everywhere. The investigation at the time found no evidence of foul play, the detective told me. No witnesses. The apartment showed nothing. The case went cold. But you think? I think we have a pattern, she said. That starts in Indiana in 2010 and continues in my jurisdiction in 2024. I think this man spent 14 years telling himself he'd gotten away with something, and then he married a woman with a young boy, and the old habits came back. Why keep the bin? Why keep Daniel's things? She was quiet for a moment. That's the question, isn't it? In cases like this, sometimes it's about control, about having proof of something that no one else knows, a secret you keep because you can. She looked down at her notepad. We'll know more after Indiana comes back to us. Indiana came back 3 days later. Daniel had been found. Not alive. His remains were discovered in a wooded area behind the apartment complex where my son-in-law had lived, in a section that had been searched twice in 2010 and missed both times due to heavy brush. 14 years of weather and growth had obscured what the original search teams couldn't find. The discovery came after Indiana investigators, contacted by Ohio the day of the arrest, conducted a third search with cadaver dogs. Daniel was 8 years old when he died. The medical examiner's preliminary findings indicated blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall from height or an impact with a hard surface. The precise cause, after 14 years, would take time to determine, but the direction was clear. My son-in-law had locked his first son in a confined space as punishment. At some point, something had gone wrong. He had reported the boy missing rather than face what he had done. He had moved to a different state, rebuilt his life, presented himself to my daughter as a man with one failed marriage and no children, and waited for the version of himself he preferred to become the only version anyone knew. My daughter had no knowledge of Daniel. She had never been told he existed. Her husband had shown her a single photo of himself as a child, told her he'd been an only child, mentioned Millbrook only to dismiss it. She had not asked many questions because he had made it clear early that questions about his past made him withdraw, and she had not wanted him to withdraw. I understood that, in the way I understood things about my daughter that I sometimes wished I didn't understand. She had lost her mother in 2019. She had lost her first marriage in 2020. She had been alone for a year before she met this man, and he had been attentive and steady and certain in a way that must have felt like solid ground after a long time of sinking. She had needed him to be what he appeared to be, so she had not looked closely at what he was. It did not excuse the attic. Nothing would excuse the attic. But it explained how a good woman could share a house with a monster for 18 months and not see him clearly. Monsters are not always visible. Sometimes they are the person who holds your hand at the cemetery where you buried your mother, who learns how you take your coffee, who volunteers to coach soccer on Saturday mornings so you can sleep in. Sometimes the monster is the steadiness itself, the careful performance of reliability, because a man who controls everything has learned that control is easier when the people around him feel safe. My son-in-law was charged with child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and aggravated child abuse in Ohio. Indiana filed separate charges related to Daniel's death: felony murder, concealment of a deceased person, filing a false police report, and obstruction of justice across a 14-year span. He pled not guilty to everything. The trial in Indiana took 3 weeks. I was not there for all of it, but I was there for the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. He stood at the defense table and looked straight ahead the entire time the sentence was read, the same way he'd looked at me at family dinners and Sunday barbecues, with that careful, calibrated blankness that I had always mistaken for composure. It was not composure. It was the face of a man who had spent his entire adult life making sure no one saw what was behind it. My daughter lost custody of my grandson temporarily while the family court conducted its review. He came to stay with me in the house in Akron where his grandmother and I had raised his mother, in the same room where his mother had slept as a little girl. I told him that. He thought it was interesting, and then he asked if we could have pancakes for dinner, and I said yes without hesitating for a single second. The family court review took 6 months. In the end, full custody was returned to my daughter, with conditions: ongoing therapy for both of them, regular check-ins with a family services coordinator, and a provision that any future partners my daughter introduced into her son's life would be subject to background screening. My daughter agreed to all of it without argument. She was the one who had requested most of it herself. I want to say something about my daughter, because she deserves more than the role of woman who didn't see. She is a person who survived grief, stacked on grief, her mother, her first marriage, the revelation about the man she trusted with her son's safety, and she came out of it not broken, but cracked in ways she has chosen to let the light through rather than patch and hide. She started therapy the week of the arrest. She has not missed a session in 2 years. She calls me every Sunday morning, the way her mother used to call her own mother, a habit passed down like a family recipe. She is the most honest I have ever seen her, which I think means she is finally the safest she has ever been. My grandson is 8 now. 2nd grade, obsessed with space, specifically with the question of whether any of the moons of Jupiter might have liquid water under their ice. He explained the concept of subsurface oceans to me with great seriousness last month, using a diagram he'd drawn on the back of a paper bag. He has a dog now, a beagle named Comet, who sleeps at the foot of his bed and has done more for his nightmares than anyone has been able to fully explain. He still sees his therapist every 2 weeks, a woman who works exclusively with children, who has small plants on every windowsill in her office and keeps a jar of colored pencils on her desk that her patients can use whenever they want. My grandson drew her a detailed map of our solar system once, labeling every moon of every planet. She framed it and hung it on her wall. He still gets quiet sometimes in ways that aren't like ordinary quiet. He still doesn't like closed doors. He still sleeps with the hall light on, though he told me recently that he thinks he might be ready to try without it sometime. I told him there was no rush. He said he knew. The house in my daughter's neighborhood sold 8 months after the arrest. She moved to a smaller place across town, a first-floor unit in a building with big windows and no attic. My grandson helped pick it out. His main criteria were that it had to have a yard big enough for Comet to run in and that none of the closets should have locks. The apartment they chose has neither locks on the closets nor a garage. My daughter told me she slept better in that apartment on the first night than she had in years. Daniel's family, his maternal grandmother in Millbrook, who had never stopped believing her daughter's ex-husband was responsible, attended every day of the Indiana trial. She had kept a box of Daniel's things for 14 years. His 2nd grade school photo, a drawing he made of a rocket ship, a certificate from a swimming lesson he completed the summer before he disappeared. She showed me those things in the courthouse hallway one afternoon. She held that swimming certificate the way you hold something you've been afraid would disappear if you put it down. He was a good swimmer, she said. He was so proud of that. There isn't a verdict that gives you back a child. There isn't a sentence long enough to fill the space that a missing boy leaves in a family for 14 years. But she was there when the guilty verdict was read, and I watched her close her eyes and stay very still for a long moment, the way people do when they receive news they have been waiting for so long that they need a second to confirm it's real. I am 63 years old. I spent my career in schools, watching young people become themselves. I have seen children thrive and children struggle and children survive things that seemed unsurvivable. And the one constant I kept coming back to, the thing that separated the outcomes, was whether there was someone paying attention. Someone who noticed when the quiet was different from ordinary quiet. Someone who listened without immediately explaining away what they heard. I almost didn't stop in that Tuesday afternoon. I had finished my appointment and I was tired and I had groceries to pick up and I almost drove straight home. I almost called instead. I almost told myself I'd come by the weekend. My grandson had been in that attic that morning for 45 minutes. He had sat in the dark on a hard wooden floor because he had left a worksheet on the kitchen table. He had come home from school and gone directly to his closet and sat there for an hour because he didn't know what else to do with what was inside him. He needed someone to come through the door. I happened to be the one who came. I don't say that to make myself into something I'm not. I was not heroic. I was just present. I showed up on a Tuesday because I was in the neighborhood, and I missed my grandson, and I walked through an unlocked door, and I paid attention to a padlock that didn't belong. That is all it was. That is everything it was. If you have children in your life, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, the kids down the street you've known since they were born. Pay attention to the quiet. Pay attention when the loud child gets silent, when the easy child gets careful, when the open child starts doing calculations before they answer your questions. Children communicate what they cannot say in the language of behavior, and they are counting on us to be literate in that language even when they can't teach us themselves. The attic door at my daughter's old house had a fresh padlock on it. The screws were pale where they'd gone into old wood. I noticed because I'd been in that house 100 times, and I knew what the hallway looked like without it. That's the whole thing, just knowing what normal looks like. Just noticing when it changes. My grandson is outside right now. I can hear him through the screen door, explaining something to Comet in great detail, something about tidal forces and the Jovian moons. I think, in the patient-specific voice he uses for important topics. The dog is listening the way dogs do, with total sincerity and no comprehension whatsoever. My grandson doesn't seem to mind. He just keeps talking, loud and clear and free, in the afternoon sun. 2 years ago, I found him curled in a closet in the dark, rocking, his lunch uneaten. Today, he is lecturing a beagle about the moons of Jupiter. Life goes on, not despite the hard things, but carrying them. You learn to hold the weight differently. You find out what you're strong enough to carry, and then you discover you're strong enough to carry more than that. And you keep showing up, keep walking through the doors, keep noticing the padlocks that weren't there last time. It isn't complicated. It's just the hardest, easy thing there is. Thanks for being here. If this story made you think of someone, a child, a neighbor, a situation that's been nagging at the edge of your attention, trust that feeling. Look closer. Ask the question. Walk through the door. You might be the person they've been waiting for.